Hi, I'm Jonathan Lauer from the Healthcare Performance Alliance. We are specialists in helping hospital leadership teams achieve meaningful improvements in their financial performance. As you are well aware, new rules and payment reforms are putting pressure on providers to reduce costs and capture every possible revenue dollar. In the next few minutes, I'll discuss services that can help with both of these two objectives. Most of our projects are done on a pay-for-performance basis, meaning zero fixed fees and essentially no financial risk. So we are dedicated to delivering outstanding results, not just good advice. Before I talk about our services, I wanted to show a quick snapshot of what you as hospital leaders are facing right now. Obviously, individual hospitals are unique, but in the aggregate, 30% of U.S. hospitals entered healthcare reform with negative margins, and this is both operating margins and total margins. It's probably fair to say that every hospital is bracing in some way for the effect of lower reimbursement rates. Government reimbursement cuts to hospitals will fund about $200 billion of the bill's $1.2 trillion cost. This equates to a cut of about $20,000 per bed per year for the average hospital. Of course, there will be added patient volumes, but 50% of those new patients will be Medicaid patients, and minimal growth in patient volumes is expected until 2014. Last fall, the HFMA ran a series of webinars to help hospitals understand the implications of healthcare reform. One of the suggestions I thought worth mentioning here. Their suggestion was that hospitals should adapt their cost structures so that they can profit at today's Medicare reimbursement rates. Again, each hospital is different, but in the aggregate, this would represent a cut for the average hospital of about 10% of total operating expense. The mission of the Healthcare Performance Alliance is to produce significant incremental recurring margin for clients on a pay-for-performance basis without risk to patient care, quality, or employee morale. First, at cost reduction through strategic sourcing. So what is strategic sourcing? This refers to a 4-month project employing real-time market intelligence, e-sourcing tools, and global best practices to drive cost reduction across non-salary spending categories. A typical project could impact somewhere on the order of half the total operating expense for a hospital. The pie chart on the right shows a high-level breakdown of operating expense for a 227-bed community hospital in the state of Washington. In this case, the total operating expense was about $300 million. Salary represented about 45% of total operating expense, and external purchases of material, services, and depreciation on capital represented the other 55%. So we won't necessarily pursue all of the external spending, but this 55% of total operating expense represents the total potential opportunity for cost reduction in a strategic sourcing project. The project typically starts with a spend analysis to identify where the best opportunities are and enable the client to prioritize categories. Small teams are formed for each category with representation from key stakeholders from the hospital. We make use of a large real-time market intelligence database to obtain better information on competitive pricing, identify alternate suppliers, and run a competitive sourcing process for each chosen category. Electronic procurement tools make the process as streamlined and efficient as possible. We're tapping into best practices that have been developed over nearly 2 decades of sourcing projects in multiple industries, not just healthcare. Some historical results are worth mentioning. First, the average historical savings rate has been 18% across all categories combined. The next 2 statistics are in response to a common question, which is, do we need to change vendors in order to achieve cost savings? The answer, 97% of the time, is no, as incumbent suppliers reduce prices almost every time. In fact, 60% of the time, clients realize cost savings without switching suppliers. Finally, the benefits of a project to the organization last well beyond the end of the project. The database and all the tools we use remain as property of the client free of charge, and we often conduct formal training of the internal sourcing team at the conclusion of the project. Drilling a little bit deeper into the categories that are commonly chosen for hospital projects, this is by no means a complete list, but it gives you an idea of the array of categories that we pursue and the range of savings that we've achieved over many years of projects. You can see it varies all the way from 5% on equipment leasing up to 50% on telecom services and really everywhere in between. Looking across all categories over many years, the average savings rate is 18%. This is a list of 3 relatively recent cost savings projects at hospitals. The first was a large teaching hospital in Chicago, and you can see in the category list this project covered a lot of ground, from advertising to print to local and long-distance telecom to wireless services, office supplies and equipment, etc. The annual savings from this project was $11 million. The second one was a trauma center in southern New Jersey, and again, this one covered a broad range of spending categories, and the annual savings from this project was $6.5 million. The third one was a bit different. This was a project at the corporate office of a 31-hospital system. This one was very narrowly focused on wide area data connectivity, local and long-distance telecom, and wireless. The annual savings from this project was $3.5 million. And incidentally, this project was the first phase. The second phase is ongoing, which is a series of cost savings projects at the individual hospital level. Now, if I could turn your attention to revenues. It's probably worth noting that there's a large array of companies that do some aspect of revenue cycle consulting work. It is truly a crowded field. Our main focus is on the use of a highly sophisticated analytics program to optimize pricing and drive revenues. That's what we're going to talk about now. Let me start by defining what I mean by analytics. There was a book published in 2007 by the Harvard Business Review Press called Competing on Analytics. The intro to that book had a good definition, and I'll read it here. Certain high-performing enterprises are now building their competitive strategies around data-driven insights that in turn generate impressive business results. Their secret weapon? Analytics. Sophisticated quantitative and statistical analysis and predictive modeling. So this is what analytics refers to. So why is analytics a big deal? Well, one of the most stunning examples of the use of analytics in the business world comes from Wall Street. The quants, as they're often called, use applied math to find subtle patterns in huge volumes of financial data on companies. They write trading algorithms that make better decisions than people can and consistently beat the market. James Simons was one of the first people to do this. His medallion fund has earned net returns after fees averaging 45% annually for 20 years. His trading operation isn't a room full of finance MBAs, but a room full of computers. All the trading decisions are made by the algorithms, not by people. So how does all of this relate to reimbursement revenue? Well, a few of the quants have designed an algorithm that maximizes fee-for-service revenue by using analytics to set prices on the 50,000 or so items in a typical hospital's CDM. To explain this, let's look at how prices are normally managed. Here are 4 common approaches. The simplest is a single across-the-board percentage adjustment. A slightly more sophisticated method would be a pricing corridor or a range so that prices are adjusted within the upper and lower boundaries of the range. Another way would be to set gross charges as a ratio to historical net payments. And another way still would be to set prices in relation to a competitor's price. Strategic pricing leverages the difference in price sensitivity between items in order to drive net revenue. What do I mean by price sensitivity? With a more commodity type item, no matter how much you raise the gross charge, the net payment stays the same. We would say that is a price insensitive item. There are other items, though, where the net payment does rise as gross charges go up, at least within a reasonable range. The degree of price sensitivity can be quantified for every item and used to optimize gross charges in the CDM. Strategic pricing is the best way to manage prices in order to drive net revenue. The problem is that it's essentially an impossible task to implement manually on 50,000 or so items. So pricing analytics is strategic pricing implemented using computer algorithms. It creates a net revenue calculator, then runs an optimization algorithm that crunches the numbers until it finds the unique combination of gross charges that produces the maximum possible net revenue. Conceptually, there's a revenue curve or a revenue function, where each point on the curve is a different combination of gross charges. The algorithm is finding the maximum revenue, or the red dot, on this curve. It's important to understand that there is only one maximum on the curve. Over time, of course, as the inputs change, so does the curve itself, and the algorithm needs to be rerun periodically to maintain a revenue-optimized CDM. Finally, a written text justification is created as an explanation or an audit trail for every gross charge. This is a fairly abstract concept. This slide is trying to show it a bit more visually so you can understand it more easily. Conceptually, you have inputs and you have outputs. The inputs in the upper left with the green arrows are what essentially anyone who is doing a pricing algorithm uses: historical pricing and net revenue data, as well as, at least frequently, some degree of use of competitive benchmark data. The next two items over are actually quite unique. Set IDs, or set identifiers, refer to groups of related codes that have to be managed together. For example, single-plane, two-plane, and three-plane X-rays of the knee need to be managed as a group. A single-plane X-ray should never have a higher gross charge than a three-plane X-ray. So these are part of a set that get managed as a group, not as independent items. We also model each individual payer contract very precisely so that when the optimization algorithm runs, it does not choose any pricing that would in any way violate the provisions of an existing contract. The outputs of the model, of course, are first and foremost a revenue-optimized CDM. That would be the red dot on the curve on the previous slide. And on the right, almost as important, is documentation of the gross charge for every single item in the CDM. So now we'll take a look at three recent pricing analytics projects. The first was a 110-bed hospital in North Carolina with gross patient revenues of $230 million. The incremental net revenue gain from the project was $2.2 million. The second one was a large hospital system in South Florida with over 1,300 beds, $2.3 billion in gross patient revenues, and an incremental revenue gain from the project of $9.8 million. And finally, a 184-bed hospital in Georgia with $400 million in gross patient revenues and an incremental revenue gain of $5 million. The consulting industry is somewhat infamous for charging high fees and delivering semi-customized analysis of how to fix problems and improve things without ever being held accountable for doing it. The Healthcare Performance Alliance is in the results business. We deliver measurable cost reduction and revenue gains with a pay-for-performance option so that clients do not pay any fees without getting results. From a financial standpoint, the upfront investment is zero and the payback period is immediate. We have an excellent track record of client successes that came from experience and knowledge about how to develop and how to implement improved performance. We are not about recommendations, we're about results. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope to talk with you soon.